right now as this video plays, the world's most powerful naval strike group is operating just off Iran's coastline, and Tehran is fully aware of it. At the center of this force is the USS Abraham Lincoln, a 100,000-ton nuclear-powered aircraft carrier capable of projecting overwhelming air power anywhere on the planet. On board are more than 70 combat aircraft, forming a floating air base ready for rapid action. Surrounding the carrier are guided missile destroyers armed with Tomahawk cruise missiles, creating a layered ring of offensive and defensive firepower. On the flight deck, F-35C Lightning II stealth fighters, F-A-18 Super Hornets, and EA-18G Growler electronic warfare jets sit fueled, armed, and mission-ready, awaiting only a single command from the Commander-in-Chief. But this isn't just about striking power. Across Qatar, Bahrain, and the United Arab Emirates, advanced missile defense systems, including THAAD and Patriot batteries, have been quietly positioned to intercept and neutralize incoming threats. This is a calculated posture. Not only the ability to launch precision strikes, but the readiness to withstand and counter any retaliation. The message is unmistakable. This is not a symbolic deployment. It is a full-spectrum preparation built for both offense and defense. F-15E Strike Eagles have deployed to the region. F-35A stealth fighters from the Vermont Air National Guard recently crossed the Atlantic and staged through the Azores, and MQ-9 Reaper drones are flying near constant surveillance missions over the Strait of Hormuz. A communications relay jet, one of the last critical assets needed to coordinate complex strike operations, has arrived at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, the nerve center of American military power in the Middle East. This is not a drill, and this is not a bluff. This is the largest American military buildup in the Middle East since Operation Midnight Hammer, the devastating strike on Iran's nuclear facilities in June of 2025. So the question every strategist, every general, and every world leader is asking right now is simple. What happens when America strikes Iran again? And how will this war actually unfold? To understand why the United States may be days or weeks away from launching a major military operation against Iran, you have to understand what has happened inside that country over the past 2 months. Beginning in late December 2025, the Iranian people erupted in the largest anti-government protests the Islamic Republic has ever faced, sparked by a collapsing economy, skyrocketing inflation, and a currency in freefall. Within days, demonstrations spread to all 31 provinces and more than 200 cities, with Iranians from every walk of life, students, shopkeepers, factory workers, and professionals flooding the streets demanding the end of clerical rule. Protesters chanted death to Qam and long live the Shah, openly calling for the overthrow of the 86-year-old supreme leader Ali Khamenei and the entire Islamic Republic system that has ruled Iran since 1979. The regime's response was catastrophic. Khamenei reportedly ordered security forces to crush the protests by any means necessary, and what followed were the worst massacres in modern Iranian history. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and Iran's police force opened fire on largely peaceful crowds with rifles and shotguns, killing thousands of civilians in scenes that horrified the world. By mid-January 2026, estimates of the death toll ranged from over 6,000 confirmed by human rights organizations to potentially tens of thousands, with over 24,000 protesters detained and an untold number facing execution. Iran's judiciary declared protesters enemies of God, a charge punishable by death, and the regime imposed a total internet blackout to prevent the world from seeing the full scale of the bloodshed. President Donald Trump responded by telling the Iranian people to keep protesting because help is on its way, and warned the regime that very strong action would follow if the killing continued. But when the protests were ultimately crushed through sheer brutality and the regime reasserted control, the question shifted, not whether America would act, but when and how. Now, with Iran racing to rebuild its ballistic missile arsenal, reportedly operating factories around the clock, and with its nuclear program still partially intact. Despite last year's strikes, the strategic calculus in Washington has shifted decisively toward military action. If and when the order comes, the first phase of an American strike on Iran would begin not with bombs, but with invisible electromagnetic waves designed to blind an entire nation. Hours before the first weapon is fired, EA-18G Growler electronic warfare jets would begin saturating Iranian radar frequencies with powerful jamming signals, creating a wall of electronic noise that degrades Iran's ability to detect incoming aircraft. Simultaneously, cyber operations, likely already underway, would target Iran's command and control networks, severing the communication links between Tehran's military headquarters and air defense batteries scattered across the country. Iran's air defense network is a patchwork of Russian, Chinese, and domestically produced systems that performed poorly during the 1-2-day war with Israel in June of 2025. During that conflict, the Israeli Air Force destroyed approximately 120 Iranian air defense launchers, roughly a third of Iran's entire pre-war infantry, and operated with near-total impunity over Iranian airspace. Since then, Iran has scrambled to rebuild, reportedly receiving Russian S-400 Triumph long-range missile systems and Chinese HQ-9 and HQ-22 batteries, alongside upgrades to its domestically built Bavara 373 system. But these systems suffer from a critical weakness that Israeli and American planners have already exploited: poor integration between different platforms, meaning each battery essentially fights alone rather than as a unified network. America's opening move would be a massive salvo of Tomahawk cruise missiles launched from guided missile destroyers and at least one Ohio-class submarine lurking somewhere in the Arabian Sea, each carrying warheads capable of precision, strikes on radar installations, and missile launchers. These cruise missiles would fly low over the terrain, hugging valleys and ridgelines to avoid detection. Striking S-400 batteries, Bavara 373 launchers, and the critical radar sites that form Iran's early warning network. Within minutes of the Tomahawk barrage, 35 stealth fighters would penetrate Iranian airspace virtually undetected, using their advanced sensors to identify and destroy any surviving air defense systems with precision-guided munitions. The B-21 radar, America's newest stealth bomber, which entered service in 2025, may also play a role. Its radar signature is so small that Iran's aging detection systems would struggle to distinguish it from background noise. Iran's air force would be essentially irrelevant in this fight. Its fleet of roughly 150 fighters consists primarily of American F-4 Phantoms and F-14 Tomcats, purchased before the 1979 revolution. Aircraft so outdated they are often described as a flying museum. The two Russian Su-35 fighters Iran received remain unassembled as of early 2026, and its domestically produced jets lack the avionics and weapons to challenge fifth-generation American stealth aircraft. Within the first 24 hours, America would likely achieve what military planners call air supremacy, not just control of the skies, but the complete elimination of Iran's ability to contest them. With Iran's air defenses neutralized, the second and most critical phase would focus on the single greatest threat Iran poses to American forces and allies: its massive ballistic missile arsenal. Iran possesses the largest missile stockpile in the entire Middle East, with an estimated 2,000 or more ballistic missiles capable of striking any target within 2,000 kilometers, covering every American base in the region and all of Israel. These missiles are Iran's primary instrument of deterrence and retaliation. During the 1-2-day war, Iran fired approximately 500 missiles at Israel, with 6% striking built-up areas, despite Israeli and American missile defenses. Since that war, Iranian factories have been operating around the clock to rebuild the arsenal, importing thousands of tons of sodium perlorate from China, a critical ingredient for solid rocket fuel, to produce hundreds of new medium-range ballistic missiles. American intelligence knows that many of these missiles are stored in hardened underground bunkers, buried deep inside mountains, in facilities Iran calls missile cities. Vast subterranean complexes at depths of up to 500 m. Destroying these underground missile cities would require the same weapon that devastated Iran's nuclear facilities, the 30,000 pounds GBU 57 massive ordnance penetrator, the largest conventional bomb in the American arsenal, carried exclusively by B-2 Spirit stealth bombers. B-2s operating from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri demonstrated this exact capability during Operation Midnight Hammer, flying 36-hour round-trip missions to drop 14 of these Earth-penetrating bombs on Iran's underground nuclear complexes. This time, the target list would be far longer. Israeli intelligence has identified at least 30 to 35 major missile industrial complexes and approximately 25 missile bases, and American planners would aim to strike as many as possible in a sustained campaign. Above ground, F-15E Strike Eagles and carrier-based F/A-18 Super Hornets would hunt mobile missile launchers, the truck-mounted transporter erector launchers that can fire and relocate within minutes using real-time intelligence from satellites and Reaper drones. The goal would be to destroy Iran's ability to launch a devastating retaliatory missile barrage before the regime can give the order to fire everything it has. Perhaps the most consequential and controversial element of any American strike would be what military planners call decapitation. The targeting of Iran's senior political and military leadership. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, at 86 years old, is the single most powerful person in Iran. The man who ordered the massacre of thousands of his own citizens, and who ultimately controls both the nuclear program and the Revolutionary Guard. American intelligence agencies have spent decades mapping the locations, movements, and communication patterns of Iran's senior leadership, and modern surveillance technology has made hiding from American reconnaissance extraordinarily difficult. During the 1-2-day war, Israel demonstrated this capability by targeting senior Iranian military commanders with precision strikes, proving that even well-protected figures can be located and eliminated. If the order is given to target Khamenei himself, it would represent the most significant American decapitation strike since the 2020 assassination of IRGC commander Qasem Soleimani, but with far greater strategic consequences. Alongside Khamenei, American strikes could target the senior commanders of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the military force that serves as the regime's Praetorian Guard and controls Iran's missile program, nuclear ambitions, and internal security apparatus. The IRGC's top leadership, including commanders who directed the massacre of protesters, would be high V-value targets, whose elimination could accelerate the collapse of the regime's command structure. However, targeting a head of state carries enormous geopolitical risk. It would set a precedent that could destabilize international norms, and there is no guarantee that removing Khamenei would lead to a more stable or cooperative Iran. American planners would likely prepare multiple options for the president, ranging from limited strikes on military infrastructure to a comprehensive campaign that includes leadership targets, allowing the commander-in-chief to calibrate the level of escalation. The moment American missiles begin striking Iranian territory, the Islamic Republic will launch its most devastating retaliation. And this is where the greatest danger of a wider war begins. Iran's first targets would almost certainly be American military bases scattered across the Persian Gulf region, where approximately 30,000 to 50,000 U.S. service members are stationed at facilities in Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, the UAE, Iraq, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia. During the 1-2-day war, Iran demonstrated its willingness to strike American assets directly when it launched missiles at Al Nuwayd Air Base in Qatar, the headquarters of U.S. Central Command, in retaliation for Operation Midnight Hammer. This time, with the regime potentially facing an existential threat, Iran could fire hundreds of ballistic missiles simultaneously at multiple American bases, overwhelming missile defense systems through sheer volume. The THAAD and Patriot batteries now being deployed across the region are specifically designed to counter this threat. But the 1-2-day war revealed that even the world's most advanced missile defenses can be strained. Israeli interceptor stockpiles were nearly depleted, defending against roughly 500 Iranian missiles. Iran's second major target would be Israel, America's closest ally in the region, and a country that Iran has vowed to destroy for over 4 decades. Israeli intelligence has warned that Iran aims to eventually fire 2,000 missiles simultaneously in a future conflict, a number specifically designed to overwhelm Israel's Iron Dome, David's Sling, and Arrow missile defense layers. Israel would almost certainly join the American strike, just as it did during the 1-2-day war, when its air force systematically dismantled Iranian air defenses and nuclear infrastructure, this time focusing on eliminating whatever missile capability Iran has rebuilt. The combined firepower of the American and Israeli militaries operating together represents the most lethal conventional force projection capability in human history, and Iran's military leadership knows this. If the regime believes it is facing destruction, Iran possesses one card that could shake the entire global economy. The Strait of Hormuz, a narrow waterway just 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, through which 20% of the world's oil supply passes every single day. In 2024, approximately 20 million barrels of oil per day moved through this strait, representing roughly 27% of all global maritime oil trade and the economic lifeblood of Asia, Europe, and much of the world. Iran has the longest coastline on the Persian Gulf and has built its naval strategy around the ability to threaten this choke point, deploying hundreds of missile-armed speedboats. Coastal anti-ship missile batteries, naval mines, explosive-laden, unmanned surface vessels, and cruise missiles with ranges exceeding 1,000 kilometers. The IRGC Navy operates from secret underground naval bases along Iran's southern coast, from which swarms of fast attack craft could surge into the strait faster than any conventional naval force could respond. If Iran attempted to close the Strait of Hormuz, oil prices could spike by $10 to $20 per barrel immediately, with some analysts warning prices could breach $150 or even $200 per barrel in a worst case scenario, triggering a global energy crisis. China, India, Japan, and South Korea import roughly 80% of the oil that transits this strait, meaning a closure would not just hurt the West, it would the economies of America's most important trading partners in Asia. However, there is a critical reason Iran has never followed through on decades of threats to close the strait. Doing so would also destroy Iran's own oil exports, cutting off the regime's primary source of revenue at the moment it needs money most. The United States Navy's Fifth Fleet, headquartered in Bahrain, exists specifically to keep the Strait of Hormuz open and its destroyers, submarines, open, and carrier-based aircraft would engage Iranian naval forces with overwhelming firepower. In practice, military analysts believe Iran could harass shipping and create chaos in the strait, but a complete closure would be nearly impossible to sustain against the full weight of American naval power. Any American strike on Iran would immediately draw reactions from the world's other great powers, and the responses from Russia and China would shape whether this conflict remains contained or spirals into something far more dangerous. Russia and Iran signed a comprehensive strategic partnership treaty that entered into force in 2025, followed by a formal consultations plan covering 2026 through 2028, the closest the two nations have ever been in modern history. Moscow has supplied Iran with S-400 air defense systems, Yak-130 trainer aircraft, and various military technologies, while Iran has provided Russia with the Shahed drones that have devastated Ukrainian cities. But Russia, bogged down in its war in Ukraine and facing its own economic pressures from Western sanctions, has limited ability to directly intervene militarily on Iran's behalf. Its response would likely be confined to diplomatic condemnation, intelligence sharing, and accelerated weapons deliveries. China presents a more complex challenge. Beijing is the primary buyer of Iranian oil and has delivered HQ-series air defense systems and thousands of tons of missile propellant precursors to Tehran, making it a critical enabler of Iran's military rebuilding. China would face enormous pressure to act, but its options are limited. A direct military confrontation with the United States over Iran is something no Chinese strategist would recommend, as it would jeopardize China's far more important economic relationship with the West. Instead, China would likely respond through the United Nations Security Council by ramping up covert military supplies to Iran and by using the conflict to strengthen its narrative that the United States is an aggressive imperialist power, a message aimed at the developing world. Both Russia and China would calculate that an American strike on Iran, while damaging to their ally, ultimately weakens American military readiness and diverts resources from the Pacific and Europe, theaters where Moscow and Beijing have their own ambitions. For millions of Iranians who took to the streets chanting for freedom, the most hopeful scenario is one where American military pressure combines with internal unrest to finally topple the Islamic Republic, a regime that has ruled through fear for 47 years. Waiting in the wings is Reza Pahlavi, the 65-year-old son of Iran's last Shah, who has lived in exile in the United States since 1978 and has emerged as the most visible opposition figure during the recent protests. From his home in America, Pahlavi called on Iranians to seize city centers and prepare for his return, declaring that the regime's end was near. And in the streets, protesters answered with chants of "Pahlavi will come back" and waved the pre-revolution lion and sun flag. Pahlavi has stated publicly that he does not seek to restore the monarchy, but rather to lead a transition to a secular democratic system, followed by a free national referendum where Iranians would choose their own form of government. U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff reportedly met secretly with Pahlavi to discuss the protests, marking the first high-level contact between the Trump administration and Iranian opposition figures, a signal that Washington is at least considering a post-regime future. However, President Trump himself expressed uncertainty about Pahlavi's ability to mobilize sufficient domestic support, suggesting the administration is keeping its options open rather than committing to any single opposition figure. The fundamental challenge is that overthrowing the Islamic Republic is far easier than building what comes after. Iran is a complex nation of 88 million people with deep ethnic, religious, and political divisions. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps controls vast economic enterprises worth billions of dollars. By billions of dollars, and its senior commanders would fight to preserve not just the regime, but their personal wealth and power, making a peaceful transition enormously difficult. American policymakers remember vividly the lessons of Iraq in 2003, where the toppling of Saddam Hussein led to years of sectarian chaos, and they are deeply wary of creating another power vacuum in a country 3 times Iraq's size. Any American strike on Iran would carry enormous risks that every honest strategist must acknowledge. Iran has already demonstrated its willingness to strike American bases directly during the 1-2-day war. Its missile attack on Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar could have killed American service members, and a larger campaign could produce casualties that would shock the American public. The economic consequences would ripple across the globe, even without a full closure of the Strait of Hormuz. The mere threat of disruption would spike oil prices, raise gasoline costs for American families, and inject uncertainty into an already fragile global economy. Iran's network of proxy forces, though severely degraded after the fall of Assad in Syria and the devastation of Hezbollah in Lebanon, still includes militia groups in Iraq that could target American personnel with rockets and roadside bombs. And there is the specter that haunts every American military intervention in the Middle East: mission creep, the gradual escalation from limited strikes into an open-ended commitment that drains American blood and treasure for years. But the cost of inaction carries its own dangers. Iran is rebuilding its missile arsenal at a pace that alarms Israeli and American intelligence, importing critical materials from China despite international sanctions. The Defense Intelligence Agency has assessed that Iran could develop a militarily viable intercontinental ballistic missile by 2035 using its space launch vehicle technology, a weapon that could eventually reach the continental United States. And Iran's nuclear program, though severely damaged by Operation Midnight Hammer and Israeli strikes, is not permanently destroyed. Intelligence assessments suggest the setback may be only 2 years, and Iran has already hinted at constructing new enrichment facilities. For the regime in Thran, every month that passes without decisive action is a month to rebuild, rearm, and move closer to the nuclear threshold that would make it virtually untouchable. The men and women making decisions in the White House, the Pentagon, and the situation rooms of America's intelligence agencies face a choice that will shape the Middle East for a generation. One path leads to a negotiated solution, using the massive military buildup as leverage to force Iran into genuine concessions on its nuclear program and missile arsenal, backed by the credible threat that the alternative is devastation. President Trump himself has left this door open, writing that he hopes Iran will come to the table and negotiate a fair deal, language that suggests the military buildup may be designed to compel diplomacy rather than replace it. But Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Ari, has warned that if attacked, Iran would be firing back with everything we have. And analysts who study the regime believe that. Cam-cornered and facing no safe exile may view this as a fight for survival with nothing left to lose. Unlike Bashar al-Assad, who fled Syria when his regime collapsed. Cam and the Revolutionary Guard commanders have no escape plan. There is no friendly nation waiting to shelter them, no comfortable exile awaiting. This makes the regime both more desperate and more dangerous, because leaders who believe they have nothing to lose are capable of decisions that rational actors would never make, including ordering a devastating first strike on American bases or attempting to close the Strait of Hormuz. The second path leads to a military campaign, perhaps beginning with limited strikes on missile factories and military installations designed to degrade Iran's capabilities without triggering all-out war. American planners learned from Operation Midnight Hammer that precision strikes can achieve strategic objectives without a ground invasion. 7 B-2 bombers, carrying 14 bunker-busting bombs, set Iran's nuclear program back years in a single night. A larger campaign could systematically dismantle Iran's missile production infrastructure, destroy its rebuilt air defenses, and eliminate the military commanders who carried out the massacre of protesters, all while keeping American boots off Iranian soil. But limited wars have a way of becoming unlimited. Iran's retaliation could force escalation. A stray missile could kill hundreds of American troops, or the regime could collapse in ways that demand American intervention to prevent chaos. The third path, the one that keeps strategists up at night, is that events spiral beyond anyone's control. That an American strike triggers an Iranian response, that triggers an Israeli response that draws in Hezbollah remnants, Iraqi militias, and possibly even Russian or Chinese military assets. A wider regional war in the Middle East, centered on the world's most important energy choke point, would be an economic catastrophe of a scale not seen since the 1973 oil embargo. What is unfolding right now between the United States and Iran is not merely a military standoff. It is the collision of 47 years of failed diplomacy, broken promises, and irreconcilable visions of what the Middle East should look like. The Islamic Republic built its identity on opposition to America and Israel, funded terrorist proxies across the region, pursued nuclear weapons in violation of international agreements, and massacred its own citizens when they dared to demand freedom. The United States, for its part, has the military capability to fundamentally reshape the strategic landscape of the Middle East in a matter of days. The question is whether the will exists to use it and whether the consequences can be managed. As the USS Abraham Lincoln takes up position in the Arabian Sea, as F-35 stealth fighters stage through the Azores, and as B-2 bombers stand ready at White-Itman Air Force Base, the world holds its breath. The people of Iran, many of whom have risked their lives in the streets demanding freedom and paid a heavy price for it, are now watching closely, waiting to see whether the assurances given to them will truly be honored. Inside fortified bunkers, the Ayatollahs and commanders of the Revolutionary Guard face their own uncertainty. With limited options and mounting pressure, they are weighing their next move: open negotiations, launch retaliation, or focus solely on survival. Meanwhile, the United States military, the most formidable fighting force ever assembled, stands ready, calm, disciplined, and prepared. It waits for a sea command that could arrive at any second. What unfolds next remains uncertain. But one reality is undeniable. The entire world is watching. The choices made in the days and weeks ahead will shape the Middle East and potentially the global balance of power for decades to come.